Welcome back, everybody.
Moment, I would like to have the ladies and gentlemen behind the screen here cue a tape entitled Canada Fireball. And while they're dimming the lights, let me coach you a little. What you're going to first see up in the night sky, you will interpret to be a full moon. It is not a full moon. It is the object of interest. Number 2, please note that it is above the clouds. Number 3, please note the strobing. And number 4, watch at the 5:30 position. That is down below the round ball of light very, very closely, and you will see an object for just a half a second or so streak apparently from ground level up and apparently join with this object. With that, could we please play the tape?
Whatever it was, got residents from Canada to Michigan, as well as some scientists, fired up. John Calplant reports it might have been a meteor shower.
Nothing but a charred skeleton remains of the burned-out mobile home, but it's managed to draw crowds of curious onlookers, the media, and scientists, because of early reports that the blaze was caused by a meteorite. Maddie Jessup is a witness who lives nearby.
I pulled up just after a friend of mine, and she had seen this fireball. She actually saw the fireball, and they followed it right into here. The airport is just about 3/4 of a mile up, and we both thought it was a small aircraft that was coming down. We talked to the Windsor police, and they said somebody had also reported a fireball, so now we're thinking meteorite, you know, possible, very possible.
We're not precluding that it wasn't something from the sky, and we're not precluding that it wasn't arson, so at this point, we don't know.
Okay, did the fire department from Windsor initially say that it was caused by the meteorite? They had recovered
No,
something?
I have no reports from the fire department at all in my possession.
A professor and a student from the University of Windsor Earth Sciences Department poked through the debris this morning looking for evidence of a meteorite. They used a special device to detect radiation, but they came empty-handed. Okay, what'd you find in there?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. There's no evidence of any meteorite impact. It doesn't rule out that there wasn't one, but there is no evidence of it. If there was one, it was probably a very small, maybe nut-sized or even smaller, that would still provide the kind of a trace that you see in the sky, but when it hits the ground, it doesn't leave much of a trace on the ground.
A local astronomer tells us 100 tons of meteors pass through the atmosphere every day.
This was the plane dropping the flares out. It's going
in summary,
in the wrong direction.
The fireball, or whatever it was, that streaked over Toronto, Ontario, over Lake Erie, down across Pennsylvania, and stopped. Sometime, if I come back to the International UFO Congress, I would like to do a 3-hour analysis, a workshop on just this case. It is fascinating. Well, I see my time is running out, so I'm going to start accelerating these slides. I'd like to get through the Phoenix Lights. I'd also like to get to a case that occurred recently in Chicago. I think you'll find it very interesting. Here's another case from November 17th, 1995. This is one of the rare cases, if we could have the slide on the screen, please, one of the rare cases in which two groups of UFOs were seen to converge at a point. Again, it was a Friday night, the 17th of November. Could we have the slide on, please? There we are. Thank you. On that night, an object streaked down the coast of New England. And when I say streaked, people up in York and Kennebunkport, Maine, this flew, by the way, right over the Bush mansion in Kennebunkport, Maine, which may explain a lot. It streaked down the coast. People up there reported that it went from the northeastern horizon up the coast of Maine, across their heads, and disappeared towards Boston, leaving a blue stripe across the sky. And it covered 160 degrees of arc or so in about 2 seconds. That's what they saw. Airliners in the vicinity of the Long Island, about 36 airliners reported this incident to the FAA. It was a very interesting case, At the same time this was happening, there was a cluster of 5 red lights that were orbiting around a mountain in Orange, Vermont, and they were seen, scared the daylights out of a woman. She actually left her farm, leaving the hubby and kiddies up on top of a mountain, left her farm to go get a neighbor to look at this. I have all of this on audio tape. Here is my first attempt to recreate the ground tracks of the 2 separate objects. 20 minutes later, 20 minutes after the first object went down the coast of Maine, an object that looked like that, again green and yellow, we have heard that combination of colors before in this presentation already, went down the coast of Maine very slowly and very low to the ground, scared the daylights out of a nurse. This is now about 10:40 p.m. We know the time because the nurse who saw it had left work at 10:30 sharp. Took him about 10 minutes to get to this point in his route home. Well, another case, this is Easter of 1996. A retired U.S. Air Force pilot was watching aircraft take off from Stapleton Airport in Denver, and he was flabbergasted to see an object that looked like a disc with a chunk taken out of the leading edge of it, streaked towards a departing airliner. As it got very close, he thought there was going to be a tremendous collision. Closing velocity, he estimated at 500 knots, almost Mach 1. And at the last instant, the object flipped around the airliner, got on the far side of the airliner, reportedly, then flipped its nose up so it's now vertical, and it accelerated to what the pilot estimated to be 3 times the original closing velocity, and just streaked out of sight into the blue sky. He was flabbergasted. The reason I know he was a pilot is that's his illustration. They don't seem to be able to draw well, but that is the documentation of the report I received. Another very dramatic incident, November 14th, 1997, Friday night, we had a cluster of lights go across the Puget Sound area. And it was so dramatic, so unusual. I got a report from a ship's captain. He had retired as a tugboat captain, and he had mounted in his front yard a ship's binnacle from one of the ships that he had commanded in years prior. He watched these objects go down. He looked at the magnetic compass in the ship's binnacle, and it was just spinning like a record on a record player. Very interesting. Sometime, if I come back, I'd like to do a workshop on this case as well. There is what the objects looked like when they went over Olympic National Park in the western end of Washington. It occurred at 21:07 hours on Friday, the 14th of November. Very dramatic case. That is a hand-drawn version of what a former U.S. Marine Corps forward observer saw as these objects went over his position. He was camped out in the Olympic Mountains. After he had seen this, he broke camp and went back down to his truck and drove home that Friday night. There's another report from Sandpoint, Idaho, where the objects were seen hovering against a mountainside near Kaiser ski area. Very interesting case. Here's another case from April of 1998. You saw this in the Peter Jennings program, UFOs Seen as Believing. You saw some of the witnesses along this ground track of this object that this object made. In brief, an object streaked down from Canada, went right over the head of a former Canadian F-104 fighter pilot, went right over his head, headed south. It stopped about here and hovered for about 10 seconds. It jumped to the west, hovered for another 10 seconds, and then it descended slowly and went across the Bangor submarine base where they keep nuclear weapons. That's what it looked like, allegedly, when it went across Bangor submarine base. And this article, which appeared about 9 weeks later, is what tells me that Bangor submarine base and the U.S. Navy probably succeeded in videotaping that object, because they talk about the sensors that they have planted in the ground around the concrete bunkers where they store nuclear weapons, and the padding of the feet of Canadian geese who fed on the lawns was setting off the sensors. I reason that if they have sensors around those bunkers, does it make sense that they probably have 24-hour video coverage of that very top secret and highly secure area? I think they do.